Mr. President, the Congressional Budget Act, an actual law of the United States, requires that Congress pass a budget by April 15th. Pass a budget by April 15th. The Republican House has passed its budget. They stated to the nation their financial vision for the future. The Democratic Senate, however, has not passed a budget in 750 days. 750 days since we've had a budget that passed the United States Senate. This year, they haven't even brought a budget forward to committee to begin to mark up a budget as specifically required by the same statute. They've not even put forward a plan. The Democrats control the Senate. They've campaigned for the majority. And as my wife says to me, when I complain, you ask for the job. So we have the largest economy on earth, and we are in the middle of a fiscal crisis. For the majority party to skip work on the nation's budget is not something to be taken lightly. So I would ask my good friend, the senator from Utah, the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, my former chairman in Judiciary Committee, if the American people were polled, Senator Hatch, how many do you think would say the Senate shouldn't pass a budget?
Well, that's a good question. My friend from Alabama, the distinguished ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, he really has asked a fundamental question. And the answer to me, and I think everybody else, is clear as a bell. The American people overwhelmingly expect the Senate to do the people's business. The first order of business is to get our fiscal house in order. The House of Representatives has taken the first step. Folks in Utah have dealt with their family budgets, their business budgets, and their government budgets. And they rightly ask that the Senate do exactly the same thing.
Well, one reason it's so important to have an honest, open budget process is that the budgets are so easy to manipulate and spend. The president, in proposing a budget some time ago, said his budget called on America to live within its means and, quote, not add more to the debt. That was the president's own statement. While, in fact, his budget doubled the debt of the United States in 10 years, producing annual deficits each year, the lowest deficit of which never once fell below $748 billion. So does the senator from Utah believe the White House and Democratic-led Senate should produce an honest, concrete, fact-based budget that we can rely on?
Well, I sure do. They actually worsened the deficit $2.2 trillion in relation to the CBO baseline. Until you see the numbers in black and white, a budget is just talk. Democrats and Republicans have an obligation to produce their fiscal blueprints in an intellectually honest, complete, and transparent fashion. As the majority Senate Democrats have privilege and responsibility to take the first step, Republicans have a responsibility to convey our fiscal blueprint through debate and amendments. That's the way it's traditionally and really always been done.
Senator Hatch, just for the people who might not understand, you've been chairman and ranking member of important committees. It is the chairman's responsibility to even call a hearing and to begin a markup, and a minority is not able to call the committee into effect. So we do have to look for the chairman, and probably the chairman would operate in relation to the majority leader to call the committee into session. Is that right?
Well, there's no question about it. The chairman has the responsibility of holding the hearings that lead up to a budget resolution, structuring the budget resolution in accordance with his party's beliefs, it seems to me, and then bringing it up in committee where both sides can argue about it, both sides have their right to amend, both sides have their right to improve it, and then bring it out of committee and bring it to the floor. But they don't do that. And then they wonder why we're in such fiscal difficulties. And I know the distinguished senator from Alabama understands this fully as the ranking member on the Budget Committee, having also been chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And frankly, I'm really concerned about it because, and I think everybody's concerned about it because they don't seem to ever want to come up with a budget. And there may be some reasons behind that that aren't valid.
Well, I would agree. A budget is fundamentally a plan, your vision for the financial future of America, and it's rather astounding that the party that's in the majority is not even prepared to state to the American people the direction.
If the Senate would yield, there is nothing more important in all of our lives right now than coming up with a budget that hopefully will show us on a downward trend as far as spending goes. We're now spending somewhere around 69% of the GDP. Our national debt at $14.3 trillion is 90% of the GDP. Now, according to the President's own actuaries, we're headed towards 90% of the GDP of spending. We get there, this country's going to have difficulties that are going to be very difficult to overcome. And that's where we're headed. And especially if we don't even have a budget we can debate on the floor of the Senate.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, when the President submitted his budget, Mr. Erskine Bowles, whom the President had asked and did in fact chair the Fiscal Commission that's supposed to come up with a plan to help us get out of this fix, Mr. Bowles said about the President's budget, it's nowhere close to what is necessary to avoid our fiscal nightmare. As a matter of fact, we've heard reports that the Democratic caucus is debating a budget in closed-door caucus meetings, have done that at least twice. And this is now 6 weeks after the committee deadline to bring forward a budget has passed. These reports indicate that in order to oblige the Senate's leading progressive, the senator from Vermont, Senator Conrad, has moved his budget further to the left, I think, than he probably desired.
That's right.
So we're told this budget now has more taxes than savings, raising taxes $2 trillion, possibly even $2.7 trillion. We'll have to see it to know. All we're hearing is news reports at this point, while cutting just $1.5 trillion in spending over 10 years. Even the President in his April speech called for $3 in spending cuts for every $1 in tax increases, although our analysis of his speech shows he did not do that. Right. But that's what he says is the right approach. As a ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, what are your thoughts, Senator Hatch, about how steep tax hikes would affect the economy? Would it be better to cut wasteful Washington spending or to raise taxes to continue the spending spree we've been on?
Our corporate tax rate is 35%. That's the highest in the world other than Japan. And it's really causing a lot of corporations to leave our country. In the 1970s, 39 of the top 50 multinational corporations in the world were based here in the United States. Today, only 16. Or at least that was the last figure I had. It's really low. And the reason is because we're taxing them to death, and we have a lot of other screwy tax aspects that really don't work. We could solve all these problems if we just get a decent budget here and all work to bring spending under control and get us on a downward trend with regard to spending. And I've got to say, we can't do it without budget debates and budget battles. But our friends on the other side don't seem to be able to get their caucus together to be able to allow the chairman to come up with a budget that, on time, in a way that will help us to debate this matter and hopefully resolve it here on the floor.
Well, I think you're right, Senator Hatch, and our colleagues, really good friends on the other side. There's some very this Senate is filled with remarkable people, but I think they are paralyzed, frankly, by the challenge of putting a plan on paper that can actually be examined, the numbers calculated, and ideas confronted. I think that their problem is they are not able to produce a budget that their caucus will support, that the American people will support, and that would actually get the job done. That's a difficult challenge, but if you want to be a leader, you have to meet that challenge.
Well, my friend from Alabama, as he always does, has arrived precisely at the critical point. We need a fiscal policy that is balanced. Its remedies must respond to the causes of our current fiscal calamity. In the most recent fiscal year, spending, as I said, hit over 25% of GDP. Now that figure is easily over the 20% that our historical average has allowed. I mean, it's unbelievable that we're spending that much.
Well, I'm
we're taxing
afraid
enough, we're just spending us into oblivion, and that's the problem.
This is true, and it's a dangerous thing to our country. We have gone 750 days without passing a budget in the Senate. I do believe that if you took a poll of the American people, what percentage would one get if they were asked, should the Congress of the United States, particularly at a time of great financial danger, should they have a budget? And we won't have a budget unless the Senate acts. So it's a question both of philosophy and economics. Philosophically, the American people do not want Washington to hike taxes on millions of Americans in order to fund its wasteful spending spree. Economically, the evidence shows cutting spending, not raising taxes, and we've done a number of studies on this, is the approach that consistently produces the best results time and time again. We need a budget based on facts. We need a budget that grows the economy, not the government. We need a budget that imposes real spending discipline on Washington. We need a budget without gimmicks or empty promises. We need a budget that is produced publicly and openly, allowing the American people full opportunity to see what's in it and to consider it. We need a budget that the American people deserve, an honest budget that spares our children from both the growing burden of debt, the growing burden of big government. We need a budget that ensures America will compete, creating jobs, and lead and thrive in the 21st century.